Afternoon, everyone. So pleased to see you. Welcome to all of our visitors. I hope you'll come back again and again and again and become more than a visitor. We live, in fact, today may well be seen historically as a turning point in history. As we speak, Pope John Paul II lies, dying, perhaps even by now is dead. And we will, for the next couple of months really, have wall-to-wall, all Catholic all the time, all Vatican, all Pope, the memories of him will go on for a week or two. Then the conclave will come about, and we'll all learn something fascinating. The conclave is utterly a fascinating process the Catholic Church goes through, and so we'll be seeing a great deal of that. Now, a lot of you are too young to recall, but I recall when Pope John the 23rd was selected as Pope. I believe it was 1958 when he was actually selected as Pope. He was succeeded by Pope Paul VI. I got it backwards. No, I got it right, I think. By Paul VI. Now, I remember distinctly when he was selected by the cardinals. And then he was succeeded by John Paul I. And he chose his name by selecting the name of John and Paul, combining them together, because he wanted to pull the best of both of these popes together and to go forward with the church. 33 days later, he was dead. And Karol Wojtyla was elected pope, and he chose the name John Paul II, since John Paul I, I guess, had such a short time in the office. It set the stage for a very long papacy, and one that presided over great changes in the world at that time. I would say it's arguable that if Luciano, I think his name was Luciano, who was Pope John Paul I, had lived, if he had lived and the church had time to absorb this man and be ready for the next conclave, I think it's unlikely that Karol Wojtyla would have ever been Pope. I think it's probable that because of that short papacy that was there, and the political struggles, you may be amazed to know this, but in spite of the isolation of conclave, it is an extremely political process. The political process that had gone on selecting the first one had basically, I think, exhausted everyone for the next one that came only 33 days later. And I think they probably settled on a compromise with Karol Wojtyla, the first non-Italian pope in a very, very long time, who again became John Paul II, and one that we have known for some of you all of your lives. Some of you remember no other pope, I'm sure. Some of you may be old enough to go back to Pius XII, which I do remember him in World War II, but I wasn't around. I don't think I was around when he was elected as pope. John Paul II made no doctrinal changes in the church. Now, this was presented last night almost as though it was something unique or something special in the course of this. The only thing he did, someone said the only doctrine he changed was the death penalty, that he opposed the death penalty. Others, though, came on quickly afterward and said that's not correct. What he did was state a presumption against the death penalty, which means he felt it was used too freely, which means we ought to go into this presuming that we should not do it, and only be persuaded that we must use the death penalty in those cases that absolutely require it. But as someone pointed out, he could not change the death penalty. It was a part of the doctrinal structure, the infallible doctrinal structure of the Catholic Church. When the Pope comes into office, if he starts thinking about what, you and I can make a doctrinal change. We can study the Bible, find something new, and say we don't believe this anymore, we believe that, and we can turn our little boat very quickly into another course. The Catholic Church is a whole lot more like an ocean liner, and it doesn't turn anywhere near so easily. The Pope is the spiritual leader of 1 billion people. It's a number that absolutely boggles the mind, and you could think to yourself that if this man could turn all billion of these people in the same direction at one time, that he could effect great, great change. But the truth is he cannot. And this is one of the points that was being made last night in all the discussions about this gentleman. He and Ronald Reagan share the responsibility for bringing down the Soviet Empire. I think that history will go back and look on this and say that neither one of them would have effected it at this time it came about by himself. It actually required both of them. It required the Pope to exercise a spiritual influence on the Catholics in Poland and who remain in the Soviet Empire. And it also required the strength of the United States applied firmly by the leadership of Ronald Reagan that actually brought about the unlikely, frankly, fall of the communist empire. I never imagined that I would see that wall come down in my lifetime. But it has been a long time since all of us watched in fascination as the Germans themselves, the Berliners, tore down that wall. And one wonders if the cardinals knew what they were getting in this pope. If they really had any idea of what kind of a man he was going to end up being. They knew him. They liked him. He was a very spiritual man, all the way to being a mystic, they tell us, about him. But I really wonder if they had any idea of the kind of strength, of leadership, of energy that they would get from Karol Wojtyla as Pope John Paul II. Interestingly, both Ronald Reagan and John Paul had been actors. And we are living in a time now where television is such a powerful influence that the ability to project an image to the public, which an actor can do, has become extremely important in communication. They call him also the great communicator, as they did Ronald Reagan. And he was a great communicator. I think the 6 or 8 languages the man was considered to be fluent in, and he tried to learn a little bit of every language that he encountered as he went along. He was a very remarkable man in every sense. I think it was an important era in the history of the world, and again, I do not think that it would have happened, not at that time and not in that way, if it hadn't been for the combined influence of the United States, led by Ronald Reagan, and the Vatican, led by Pope John Paul II. It's fascinating when I think about this, that perhaps the strongest moral voice for the last quarter century in the world has not been Jimmy Swaggart, has not been Jerry Falwell, hasn't been Robert Schuller, hasn't been Benny Hinn. The strongest moral voice in the last 25 years has been Pope John Paul II. And for the most part, you would agree entirely with the moral stance that he took, that he advanced, and that he expected. There will be areas where you would not, but in most of them, you will be 100% in agreement with what he taught. Last night, I was surprised. I kicked over to MSNBC and encountered an interview being done with Pat Buchanan, who, apart from being a conservative candidate for president a couple of times now, is also a Roman Catholic, very devout Roman Catholic, a very conservative Roman Catholic. He said that he expects a major split in the Catholic Church during the next papacy. Now, the reason this was fascinating to me was because for a long time I have been saying that I expect a major split in the Catholic Church. I'd had no idea when or how or where. Pat Buchanan now comes along and begins to tell me how he thinks this will take place. He expects that this will happen because there's an enormous amount of pressure in the Catholic Church worldwide, but particularly in this country and in Europe, for the Pope to change certain key elements in the Church's position on abortion, for example, gay marriage as another example, gay priests as another example, priests being able to marry as yet another example. Chris Matthews last night, this morning I think it was saying that a lot of people are hoping, the way he put it, I could tell it was his belief. He was thinking, well, perhaps this new Pope could decentralize the Catholic Church more and giving more autonomy to the bishops in the different, so that in a nation, a given national diocese, that they could allow married priests, while in Italy or some other place they did not allow married priests. And he said this and was sailing right on by it, and I could see very quickly, this is what Chris Matthews, a Catholic, would like to see happen, something like this, because he thinks that the Church has damaged itself severely with the doctrine that you cannot be married and be a priest. He's right about that, but he's wrong in another way. There isn't any way that the Roman Catholic Church will decentralize to the extent that American priests can be married, whereas South American priests cannot. Such a thing would create such tension in the Church, it would just be untenable. But what Pat Buchanan thinks is that the next Pope will not change these things because he cannot. He is actually, will enter the office of papacy really handcuffed by the 2,000-year history of the Roman Catholic Church and the doctrine of infallibility. He can't change 2,000 years of infallible practice of the Roman Catholic Church by simply saying it is so. If he attempted it, he would split the church. Now, what Pat Buchanan was arguing was, if he doesn't do it, he will split the church. Because there is so much out there right now among Roman Catholics expecting, hoping, pressing, politicking for change. He basically, the argument from people like Pat Buchanan is these people are not really Catholic. They think they are. They have a Catholic outlook on life, but they are not Catholic to the extent that Pope John Paul II was, or that any of the cardinals are. That's just not the way that those things go. He thinks it will split the church. The church will split on many moral issues, and it may not be surprising living in the age we are living in that most of those issues have to do with human sexuality. Those people who disagree on these hope for change, but most think they will be disappointed. As Pat Buchanan says, they'll just have to find themselves another church, which I consider drawing a line in the sand pretty firmly. But he wasn't drawing it personally. What he was saying was, this is what's going to happen. The Pope will not make these changes they're hoping for because he cannot make the changes that they're hoping for. The unwillingness to do this, some people think, will provoke a schism in the church, and this has happened surprisingly often in the church's history. Now, are you familiar with the term anti-pope? An anti-pope is a person who was elected pope, but not by the canonical process of the College of Cardinals conclave or by the normal Catholic Church law process. So normal Catholic law would go through and elect a pope. Some people would not be happy with him, so a group of people would get together over here and they would select another pope. So that then you have two popes at the same time. The result of this, of course, the schism, the Roman Catholic Church fears it greatly because it's been so devastating to them in the past, is something that has been very common in the history of the church. In fact, I didn't realize until I looked it up, the Catholic Encyclopedia lists over 30 anti-popes in the history of the church. I think it's more like 33 anti-popes. People who, when there was a properly selected pope here and an improperly selected pope there, and in fact there are times when there have been more than two. When the papacy moved its main headquarters to Avignon in France, this was a period of great turmoil in the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, there were 5 anti-popes in the 11th century. There were 8 anti-popes in the 12th century. 13 in 200 years. 13 times we have schisms, splits. Sometimes it was an emperor who made the decision to put a new pope in contrary to the will of the church. Sometimes it was a wealthy family back in history. It was a lot of politics went on in the Roman Catholic Church in years gone by. Excommunications flew back and forth, with guys excommunicating one another at the same time. Malachi Martin's chapter on this era was Pick a Pope, Any Pope. It's ironic that since the Protestant Reformation, since 1500, there have been no significant schisms and no anti-popes. Not to say there haven't been divisions of one kind or another, but nothing significant has ever happened, and there have been no anti-popes. Now, I'm telling you all this so you will understand something that's likely to arise in the next few weeks. For generations, there have been people who refer to the Catholic Church as the great whore of Babylon and the Pope as the man of sin. And it's so common. I remember once I was driving through Northern Ireland, one of my early visits to Northern Ireland. Here's a barn. Down in our country you'll see a barn that says Jesus saves. Well, over in Northern Ireland you're just as apt to see no papists here. It's a Protestant barn. No papists, no people who follow the Pope are allowed in this place. Even your introduction of the King James Bible refers to popish people and the division that exists. So for generations, I'm sure going back at least to the Protestant Reformation, in fact I think longer than that, there have been those who refer to the Roman Catholic Church as the great whore. And in fact, during one little period of time, we have one set of followers of a pope calling the followers of another pope the great whore. And so these battles go on. So the idea of the Roman Catholic Church being called the great whore originated in the Roman Catholic Church, and carried on its rich history through the Protestant church as well. There are people who will suppose that the next pope could be the last pope, and that he would fulfill all the prophecies of Revelation. The last time I really heard much about that, when everybody was speculating, and speculation was really hot about the next pope, will he be the last pope, was Paul VI. I remember it vividly as all the conversation went back and forth. The number 6 was deemed significant. In fact, there were those who thought, because there had been 5 popes named Sixtus, that this one would be named Sixtus the Sixth. And what does that sound like to you? Sounds a lot like 666, and that was the idea that somebody had in mind about all that. Well, I remember the dark surmisings when they selected Pope Paul VI. But he died, and he was replaced by John Paul I, and then 33 days later, after everybody got their act together, decided what this guy was going to do, that this maybe is the last pope, well, he dies. And so we have to elect another one, who obviously is not going to be the last pope either, because he is also about to die. So this is important. Many people thought that this would be the last pope and the one to become the man of sin. And there will be, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, maybe months, who will be speculating much the same thing. Maybe this is the last pope, maybe he's the man of sin, and maybe that's what we're looking out for in the time to come. So I think what I'm telling you all this for is so you'll withhold judgment when you hear dark surmisings about the next pope. I will tell you frankly, I do not expect the man of sin, the little horn of Daniel, the little horn of Revelation, or the second beast of Revelation 13 to be a duly and properly elected pope of the Roman Catholic Church. I don't expect it. Just look at the man who has held that office for the last 26 years. There's no way that he would fit the pattern described in the biblical prophecy of the man of sin, the person who's going to do all these terrible things. He's not that kind of man. And in fact, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but all but 3 of the assembled cardinals who are going into Rome now have their bags all packed and probably reservations on the aircraft already. All but 3 of them were appointed cardinal by this pope. All but 3. So that gives you some kind of an idea of the mindset of the gentlemen who are going in there right now to select the next pope. And I do not expect them to select the kind of man that we would expect to turn up in this other way. I can easily, however, see an anti-pope arising out of a chaotic schism in the Roman Catholic Church, reacting against a pope who is trying to retain the historical position and reaching out to the people to saying, we need to liberalize things, and I'll be a better pope for you than he will. It'll be a lot like, it's an ancient historical custom. Absalom did it with David, and it has happened repeatedly in the Roman Catholic Church before. I can do this better than he can. You don't want to have to fool with these people, those evil people, that whore over there. Come and follow me. Pat Buchanan was adamant last night. No new duly elected pope is going to make fundamental changes over what they did in the last 2,000 years, and I think he is probably right. So looking at this, I think we have to understand that whatever flurry of speculation about the Pope occurs in the next few weeks, we are not likely to be looking at some man who will fulfill prophecy, except maybe indirectly, in the fact that by holding the line, he provokes a schism in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, there was something that resembled a schism in the 15th century or the 16th century, when the Renaissance popes provoked the Protestant Reformation. They did not list that in the list of anti-popes because Martin Luther did not claim to be a pope at all. That was the last big split off from the Roman Catholic Church, was the Protestant Reformation. And it came because, really, of the stupidity of about 4 or 5 popes in a row who really should have seen things that should have been changed in terms of practice, not doctrine. Because Martin Luther's differences with the Roman Catholic Church were not particularly doctrinal, which probably would surprise many people. Well, there's going to be a flurry of speculation about it in the next few weeks, so this might be a good time for us to review what the Bible actually says about these things. Revelation, chapter 13. John is envisioned, on the Isle of Patmos. He says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Now, just a couple of things to keep in mind as we go along, and I won't try to explain it yet. But the idea of a sea, or a large body of water in Scripture, as the prophets use the term, basically refers to a very large mass, the masses of people. He says, I saw the beast, which was like a leopard, his feet like the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. Now I want to pause just for a moment to remind you of something I've said before. All of us these days are familiar with the icon. A couple of generations ago, an icon was a religious object in church, a little statue. But nowadays, icons are all over our computer screen, so we all know what they are. Well, the prophecy is just shot full of icons. They are verbally expressed as opposed to being expressed by image. And when you know what the icons mean, you press on them, and they tell you something about what's going on. The sea, or a great body of water, that icon, means a mass of people. But the icons of the leopard, the bear, and the lion, for people who understand Daniel's prophecies, refer them back to this system that started with Nebuchadnezzar, made its way through the Medo-Persian empires, through Alexander's empire, and all the way down to Rome. Now it also says the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. Now when you press on the icon for the dragon, what do you get? You get the devil. I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. Now, I have heard more explanations of this than I have ways to get to work in the morning. I mean, there are more ways that people have understood this, of this king died, or this situation happened, and it looked like it was gone, and it came back again. And I think virtually all of them probably are wrong. But what we can see is that the whole world wonders after this beast. Now, for a long time now, there was a time when it was kind of believed among some, I think maybe even Hal Lindsey took this approach, that the overall development of the 10 nations of Europe would be the fulfillment of the 10 toes of Daniel, and that these things would slowly come to pass and would rise up and would become the United States of Europe, and that would be the beast. I haven't thought that for a very long time, because it seemed evident to me that was not the way these things were going to go about. That when you come back to Revelation, you have it was wounded. Its deadly wound was healed, and everybody stood aghast at the fact that this thing had come back. And it makes far more sense to realize that some great world-ruling dictatorial power, which frankly is what this book presents to us, will arise out of chaos. We have a perfect model for how this comes to pass. Know what it is? Germany. After World War I, and the chaos that ensued that allowed Hitler to rise to power. These things always, the loss of freedoms, the rising of dictators, the centralization of power like this, almost inevitably comes out of chaos. It does not arise slowly over a long period of time. Even Franco's rule in Spain for so many years came about as a result of the Spanish Civil War. I saw one of its head wounded to death, his deadly wound was healed, and the whole world wondered at the beast. And they worshipped the dragon who gave power to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, well, who's like the beast, who is able to make war with him? Now, let me give you a good example of how not to interpret the Bible. Somebody looked at this and says, who's like the beast, who is able to make war with him? That must be the United States. No one is able to make war with the United States. And, of course, this is, as I said, this is not the way you go about figuring these things out. You get one comparison over here, and you think this is it. Because we are only looking at a singular point in time right now. And even now, there have been plenty of people ready to declare war on us and think they might be able to win at least their part of it. One of them's name is Osama bin Laden, and I think you've heard of him. There was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue 42 months. And there's that number. Boy, it shows up in Daniel again and again, and again and again in Revelation. And what it is 3.5 years. Half of a 7-year cycle, if 7 years can be called a cycle. But it seems to be a singular period of time, because it's mentioned so often, you are almost inevitably drawn to think of it as not as several 3.5 year periods, but of a singular 3.5-year period. But we'll put that on the back burner and see where we go from there. Verse 6. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those that dwell in heaven. It was given to him to make war with the saints, to overcome them, and power was given to him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Now, much of what I read in commentaries and what have you, when they take this seriously as an end-time view, they see this man as a world dictator, not just as a European power. They see him as being the one guy over the whole world. Now, I don't know if that's what John is seeing here, or if he's dealing with a man who has all kindreds, powers, and nations over a segment of the world. Again, I'm not sure what John means by that. I'm willing to let you think about that and decide for yourself. All that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. That sounds like everybody, but the Bible, again, uses broad brushes to paint some of these things. All who worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If any man has an ear to hear, let him hear. Understand this, that the people who will not worship this one are those people who have their names written in the Lamb's book of life. I hope that includes all of you here. He that leads into captivity, himself finally is going to go into captivity. He that kills with a sword has to eventually be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. We have got to realize that the bad things that are happening to us today are going to happen back to the person, the perpetrator, tomorrow. Then, that wasn't enough. I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like the dragon. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Now, what on earth is this? Well, many people look at the lamb, the 2 horns like a lamb, as being, this is a Christian religious symbol. But the person who has the Christian religious symbol speaks like the dragon. And many people in times past have seen this as the Pope. And as I said, I'm not so sure that it will be what we normally would call the Pope. It may well be, though, an anti-Pope, because we are, I think, looking for some difficult times ahead. He exercised all the power of the first beast and caused the whole world to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Verse 13, he does great wonders. He makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. People see there's going to be witnesses of all this. I don't think this has ever happened, at least not since Elijah did it. He deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had the power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, they should make an image to the beast, which had a wound by the sword, and did live. Now, as far as I can see, this whole package has never taken place. Although a lot of people see implications of this in the Roman Empire, in Constantine, who took over, basically conquered in the name of the cross, became a Christian, and actually empowered the Christian church to have the power that it was going to have in the years to come, where they were able to do, unfortunately, some very bad things, just exactly like the Roman Empire before them. He had the power to give life to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. One teacher of this material, this kind of thing, was looking at this once and said that what this image of the beast is the Roman governmental system, which the Roman Catholic Church adopted almost in toto, using many of the same names that the Roman governmental system used. And there's a certain logic involved in that, I guess, in the sense that the Roman Church really became Roman in every sense of the word, adopting all of the Roman structure of government and making it Christian. Now, whether or not this is the image of the beast is another matter entirely. Of course, we also have to remember that John's in vision, and what he is seeing is symbolic. And sometimes we're left to see if we can figure out what exactly it meant. We can see it in history, in some little hints, but I think this is probably something we can look ahead to. I don't know if I look forward to it. He causes all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he had that mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Now, it's ironic, I think, that some used to see Sunday and Sunday closings as the mark of the beast, because you can't buy or sell unless you have the mark of the beast. But it was always a problem to me, because just because you can't buy and sell on Sunday doesn't say one word about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and if you don't keep the Sabbath, about Saturday. So I never really quite understood that. It was never clear to me why it was impossible, having accepted Sunday worship, to buy and sell the rest of the time. There was a juxtaposition, though, between this passage and one in Exodus. It's just a verse. I'll read it to you. Exodus 31:13. Speak to the children of Israel and say, Verily my Sabbaths you shall keep. It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know I am the Lord that does sanctify you. Okay? A sign. Then in Ezekiel, chapter 20, verse 12, Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctifies them. Later in verse 20, I am the Lord your God. Walk in my statutes, keep my judgments, do them. Hallow my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between you and me, that you may know that I am Jehovah your God. So the Sabbath day was to identify who God was by name. Now, the reasoning is that since the Sabbath was the sign of the identity of God, the mark of the beast was the contrasting sign, and therefore it would also be a day of the week. Now, there's a certain, logic connected with that, but it's an awfully thin line of logic and really not very easily supported. It's an assumption that doesn't really match the description of the mark of the beast. I'll have to say, I don't think you can demonstrate that Sunday observance, whatever that means, can be demonstrated to be the mark of the beast for whatever that's worth. Verse 18, here's wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast. It is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 666. And I was amusing thinking back on everybody thinking that Pope Sixtus VI, which we could still get that, would somehow be the mark of the beast. And what I think is wrong with that thinking is that the first people who heard this prophecy understood what John was doing. And he did not, for whatever reason, want to give the person's name, so he gave the number of the person's name. And that doesn't say a lot to the English reader, because we don't use letters for numbers, but the Greeks and Hebrews both did. And this is written in Greek. And these numbers, while they might match somebody else, absolutely match Nero. Nero Caesar, 666, is the numerological content of his name. And so everyone who initially read this said, oh, Nero. Well, now, Nero was not the religious figure that is spoken of in these prophecies. He would be a man of sin, I suppose, in a way, because he certainly was a sinful man. But he was the beast, not the second beast. And I think most people who have seen this would have understood this. Nero is at least a type of this beast. John doesn't name him outright. There are people who say that, well, while Nero was still alive, he didn't want to actually name him in this book. Now we'll take this a step further to Revelation 17. There came one of the seven angels that had the seven vials and talked with me, saying, Come with me, I want to show you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters. Now this is where the great whore thing comes from, and why people, why some Catholic popes or anti-popes pointed the finger at their opposite number, calling them the great whore of Babylon, or in one case the whore of Avignon, with whom the kings of earth have committed fornication. The inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now again, the symbolism of waters will be explained later as peoples and nations. And fornication, if you had an icon for it in the Bible, would basically be telling you that we're talking about the worship of other gods for the most part. There's, of course, literal fornication. But when it's used symbolically in this way, it's generally speaking talking about the worship of other gods and false prophets. So he carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-covered beast, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious stones, pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead there was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, who is this? The old city of Babylon was in no way dominant when this particular prophecy was written, and I don't think anyone who originally, the first people who saw this prophecy written down, or concluding John, for a moment imagined that this is actually talking about the old city of Babylon down along the Euphrates River. It doesn't make any sense. But early Christians do seem to have seen Rome in precisely those terms. And what's amusing about this in a way is that the Roman Catholic theologians see Rome as the great whore of Babylon. Imperial Rome was to them the great whore. They had no problem with it being Rome. They just didn't like it when you add the word Catholic Church on the end of it, that they didn't necessarily think that was the way you should explain it. Well, he said, I saw this woman drunk with the blood of saints, with the blood of martyrs, and when I saw her, I wondered with great wonder. And the angel said to me, what are you marveling for? Let me tell you the mystery of this woman and the beast that carries her. You got a woman, you got a beast that we're dealing with here. The beast that you saw was, is not, and shall ascend out of the abyss and go into perdition utterly. In other words, he got a cycle. He existed, then he didn't exist, then he arose out of the abyss, and he's going to go into perdition, or into destruction. And they that dwell upon the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And if you're not comfortable that your name is written in the book of the life, I would suggest you get comfortable by whatever means you need to find, because there's some tough times ahead, and those whose names are written in that book won't get suckered in by it. Here is the mind that which has wisdom. Now remember, in a sense, I think John may be writing to his people, saying things without saying them. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Anybody know where the city of 7 hills is? The city that was built upon 7 hills? Whole world knows it was Rome. And of course, looking back on it, we immediately see that. But don't imagine for a minute that John didn't see it. And don't imagine the first Christians who read this didn't see it. The city of Rome is built on 7 hills. Switching to the New International Version, he says in verse 9, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he will have to remain for a little while. The beast who once was, now is not, is an 8th king and belongs to the 7. And you can have a lot of fun figuring that one out. How can it be the 8th and still belong to the 7? I'll have to leave that for the time being. He belongs to the 7 and is also going to destruction. Now, you will find, if you just have the patience to go looking for it, dozens of different explanations of the sequence of these kings when they fell. I've seen charts, people send me charts through the mail. Please don't send me any charts through the mail as a result of this sermon. People send me charts through the mail. They draw diagrams, the lines going back and forth. Some of them, obviously, have spent so much time on. Some of them, they actually have sent me the original, upon which who knows how many dozens of hours they have spent. And I have to warn everybody right now, do not send me any unsolicited manuscripts. We do not undertake to ever send them back, or charts, especially charts. But I have seen chart after chart after chart of all these things, and there may be that one of them is right. It may be. But I think you're far safer to put these things in your mind. Get them in your mind, so that when things start happening, you say, wait a minute. You get the book of Revelation out, and you can go back and read it again, and you will know that there's something here that you should spot. I think that is the way for us to approach these things, rather than trying to explain them with charts at this point in time. This prophecy, this section here, can be seen in some ways, in some charts, historically, but it is probably future. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Now this is fascinating all by itself, because what we see here is what's coming is a period of time where for a very short period of time, 1 hour, these 10 kings are going to receive power with this beast. Now if you connect this to Daniel's vision in Daniel 2, then you begin to realize those 10 toes that are at the foot of this image, great image, that the stone strikes and smashes it and scatters it. And what we're talking about here is the event that takes place at the return of Christ. Those 10 kings exist at the return of Christ. Their very short time is ended by the return of Christ. That's what's suggested by comparing this passage with Daniel, the 2nd chapter. Now these are traditionally, as I said, compared to the 10 toes on the image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I'm not going to take the time to go back to Daniel 2. You may make a note for yourself of verses 41 through 45, but really you should read the whole chapter to get a feeling for what it's all about. Because this starts with Nebuchadnezzar and ends with the return of Christ and the establishment of the kingdom of God. And the last part of that image is 10 toes, who are only going to be there, obviously, for a very short period of time, he says here. These have one mind. They shall give their power and strength to the beast. They will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Which side of this patch you want to be on? He said to me, the waters you saw where the whore sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. But then comes something of surprise. The 10 horns which you saw upon the beast, these will hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. But in the end, they get to destroy and burn with fire the great whore. And the way this stuff gets worded is you almost wonder if the way it takes place is nuclear. The woman you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. At the time this was written, there was only one city that even began to come close to this. It was Rome. Certainly wasn't Babylon at this time. Old Babylon was impotent. Revelation 18. After these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and had become the habitation of devils, the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Now, some people look at this and say the is fallen means Babylon's going to fall twice. I think that's probably a stretch of the poetic intention of the language, and yet, this whole section here, and the way it's worded, you can find it very similar words back in the prophets talking about the old original Babylon, which did fall and became the hold of every foul and unclean bird, and became desolate, place where the jackals of the wilderness would howl. But it got rebuilt as a very relatively unimportant place in later years, but it did get rebuilt. Now, we have another one that is recognized by the Christians of the time, Rome. All nations have drunk of the wine of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. The merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. Okay, what does this tell us? Well, your mileage may vary on this, but what it tells me is that Babylon the Great here is not a system. It's a city. It's a geographical area. It's a place where God's people can be. If it's a system, God's people aren't going to be in a corrupt system, like a corrupt religious system, to be called out of it. They're going to be, but they were in Rome. And there may become a time, as God says, He said, get out of here, because I don't want you to partake of what's going to happen to Rome. It's going to happen in much the same way that it happened to Jerusalem, and I told you what to do when you saw Jerusalem encompassed with armies. Get out of there. Now I'm telling you, get out of Babylon. Don't stay here. Don't hang around here. It suggests to me a geographic area, a city, not a religious system. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you. Double to her double according to her works. In the cup which she has filled, fill it to her double. How much she has glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she says in her heart, I sit a queen. I am no widow. I shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. Now, this happened to Rome more than once. Rome was sacked and burned on more than one occasion. But this one seems to be different. The kings of the earth who have committed fornication, lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her and lament her, for when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing way off for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, that great city of Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is your judgment come. It almost sounds nuclear. It just absolutely sounds nuclear to me. Something that could happen in one day, in 1 hour, her judgment should come. That'd be burned with fire, a pillar of fire go up. The merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn for her, because no man buys their merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, all this marvelous stuff, all of it gone. And they could stand way off looking at this city. In 1 hour, it says, verse 19, she has made desolate. Rejoice over her, you holy apostles, you prophets, for God has avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall not be found any more at all. And toward the end of the chapter, verse 24, in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. The responsibility for it is there. Now, the last scripture I want to turn to, relevant to what I started out with today, is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Because here we have the man of sin, who, typically a lot of Protestants believe is talking about a pope, an end-time pope. But I'd like for us to at least keep our mind open to the possibility that there could come a time in the future where there be more than one pope. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 1. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that you be not soon shaken in mind or troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by, letter from us, that the day of Christ is at hand. That letter from us thing came about because he provoked this confusion up there by his first letter. Let no man deceive you by any means. That day shall not come, except there be an apostasy first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Man of sin, son of perdition. This is probably also the little horn of Daniel, probably also the little horn of Revelation. He says, this one opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And a lot of people down through the years have seen the way the Pope is carried back and forth on his sedan chair, and how he's placed in St. Peter, and how he's adored by the people, see him as becoming an idol for many people in the Roman Catholic Church, and I think they're probably right as far as that goes. There are other people who look at this and think, well, they think the man of sin and that particular power will be Islamic. No way. Because there is no way an Islamic leader would ever exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped or pretend to be God. That is death to any Muslim. Remember you not that when I was with you I told you these things? Now you know. They did, we don't. Now you know what holds back that he might be revealed in his time. The mystery of iniquity is already at work. Only he who holds it back will hold it back until it be taken out of the way. And you will find dozens of explanations of exactly what he meant by that in the commentaries. Then, he says, shall that wicked be revealed whom the Lord will consume with the spirit of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose working is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. Look for miracles. I mean, this guy is going to be changing societies and civilizations over the world because everybody sees what he is able to do. The world has never seen this. Never seen it. But we may very well, in fact, I think probably some of you here at least will, live to see it happen. With all deceivableness of unrighteousness and them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Because they received not the love of the truth. For this cause, God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be condemned who don't believe the truth, but had pleasure in righteousness. Is this the next pope, this man of sin? Probably not. But the news will be dominated for the next 2 months by this transition. It's going to. You thought Terry Schiavo was, blanketing the news. You've seen nothing yet. This will be all conclave all the time. He is, after all, the spiritual leader of 1 billion people who idolize him, and at least until he does or does not do what they hope he will do. They lionize him. In my opinion, the 10 nations at the end will be European, but not the EU we see right now. Nothing like it. I think the final European Union will arise out of complete chaos, and the little horn, the man of sin, the corrupt religious leader, will also arise out of chaos. But then, I could be wrong. What I suggest to you is that you don't ignore what is happening in Rome over the next couple of months, because it could have profound influence on your life and your world in days to come.